People think betrayal comes from strangers, but no, baby. Betrayal comes from the people you love most. My son and his wife thought they were clever, whispering about the future, while secretly planning to put my house in their names. Imagine finding the papers with their signatures already on the dotted line. I nearly collapsed. But instead, I started planning my revenge. And when the sheriff finally knocked on our door, my son's face told me everything. Want to hear the whole story? Let me know where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like this. When you reach my age, child, you learn that life is full of choices that look small at the time, but turn out to shape everything that comes after. I didn't grow up with much, just a mother who worked herself to the bone cleaning houses, and a father who wasn't around long enough for me to remember the sound of his voice. What I did have was grit. I had to, or else the world would have swallowed me whole. When my son, Marcus, was born, that grit became something else. Fuel. I was 21, barely out of girlhood, but I promised myself that child would never feel the shame of going to bed hungry the way I once did. Lord knows I didn't have much, but I had these hands, and I put them to work. I worked double shifts at the diner, the kind where your feet throb so bad you soak them in salt water before bed. I cleaned offices at night when most folks were home with their families, and still, I made it home in time to pack his lunch for school, sit with him while he did his homework, and kiss him goodnight. Marcus was my everything, my boy, my pride. I'd look at him sleeping and tell myself, "You're the reason I'm still standing." Every dollar I saved went into making sure he had what I didn't. New shoes when his toes pushed against the front, a decent suit for his school debate, even a trumpet when he swore he wanted to join the band. The house we live in now, this old brick place with the creaky stairs and the porch swing that sways in the breeze, that house is mine. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I scraped for this roof over my head, saving pennies in a jar while my friends spent theirs on Friday nights out. It took me 15 years, 3 loans and more tears than I can count. But I signed those papers with my own hand. No man gave it to me. No family member handed it down. This was my sanctuary, my proof that all my sacrifices meant something. And Marcus, well, he grew up knowing all that. Or at least I thought he did. But here's the thing nobody tells you when you pour your whole soul into raising a child. You don't always get back what you gave. You can pour clean water into a glass, but if the glass is cracked, it won't hold. Looking back now, maybe I spoiled him without realizing it. Maybe, in my desperation to make sure he never felt the weight I carried, I taught him comfort without gratitude. I remember when he was about 12, asking for a pair of basketball shoes that cost more than my entire grocery budget for the week. I bought them anyway, told myself it was just this once. But then, just once became twice, and then 3 times. By the time Marcus was grown, I had made peace with the fact that I'd never remarry, never build some picture-perfect family. It was just me and my boy, and I thought that was enough. He was my reason, my blood, my legacy. When he met Tasha, his future wife, I tried to be warm. She was young, stylish, always with her nails done and her hair laid just right. She had a sharp smile, the kind that cut just a little. Something in me hesitated, but I wanted my son to be happy. So I held my tongue, even when she looked around my living room like it wasn't good enough for her. I remember one Thanksgiving years back, when she laughed at my old china plates, called them vintage, with that little smirk. Marcus chuckled along, and it stung more than I let on. I brushed it off then, but those little stings, they build up over time, like pebbles filling a jar. I didn't know it yet, but the jar was about to overflow. Now don't get me wrong, I've lived long enough to know families argue. Lord knows me and my own mama had our share of shouting matches when I was a teen, but there's a line between disagreements and disrespect. A line you never expect your own child to cross. And Marcus, he crossed it. I used to sit on this very porch in the evenings, rocking in my chair, listening to the cicadas hum, thinking, this house will always be my safe place. My son will always honor that. But life has a way of snatching the rug out from under you right when you think you've found steady ground. The first signs were small. A sharp word here, a dismissive glance there, him siding with his wife when she criticized how I cooked greens too greasy. Their laughter behind closed doors that hushed when I walked in. At first I told myself it was just tension, young folks trying to find their footing. But one night I heard my name whispered in the kitchen, followed by laughter that wasn't kind, and right then a cold chill ran through me. I leaned against my bedroom door, heart pounding in my chest, straining to catch every word, and what I heard nearly made my knees give out, because the woman I'd welcomed into my home like a daughter, and the son I'd sacrificed everything for, were talking about me like I was nothing but a burden. And that was only the beginning. When Marcus first asked me if he and Tasha could stay here, I didn't hesitate. Times were hard, and I knew he had lost his job at the auto shop. Rent prices in this city could choke a working man, let alone a young couple trying to find their way. And despite the whispers of doubt that tugged at me, I said yes. This house will always be open to you, I told him. You'll never be without a roof so long as I'm breathing. He hugged me, tight at first, but I noticed how quickly he pulled away, like even showing gratitude was a weight he didn't want to carry. So they moved in. At first, I admit, I felt a kind of joy I hadn't known in years. The house that had been too quiet, too still, suddenly buzzed with life again. I cooked big dinners, my fried chicken, my collard greens, cornbread with honey butter. I set the table and listened to them laugh about their friends, their plans. For a while, it almost felt like family again. But a house tells the truth quicker than people do. It started small, the way things always do. I'd find my coffee mugs tucked behind new glass ones Tasha brought in, shiny and sleek. My old quilt that had warmed me through winters ended up folded in a closet while some pale gray throw blanket took its place on the couch. She rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, sugar and flour jars shoved in the back, her imported spices lined up in neat little rows. Just trying to make things easier, she'd say with that smile. But it didn't feel easier. It felt like I was being erased, one drawer at a time. I told myself to let it slide. After all, they were guests, even if they were family. I reminded myself that young people liked things their own way. But every time I reached for something that wasn't where I left it, every time I bit my tongue when she wrinkled her nose at my food, it was like a splinter digging deeper under my skin. Then came the tone. You know the one. That sharp edge that cuts beneath words. Marcus started using it more and more when he spoke to me. Not full arguments, just dismissive remarks. Ma, you don't need to worry about that. Ma, that's old-fashioned. Ma, why you always got to do it your way? It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like I was some silly old woman stuck in my ways. One night, I sat at the dining table long after the dishes were cleared, just listening to the muffled sounds of them in the living room. Their laughter drifted through the air, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't inviting. It felt like a wall I wasn't allowed to climb, and the whispers kept coming. I'd walk into the kitchen and hear their voices cut off, their eyes darting like I had intruded. Once, I caught the tail end of Tasha saying, "She acts like this is still her house." Marcus shushed her when he saw me, but the damage was done. Still, I clung to the thought that it was only stress, that maybe Marcus was ashamed of having to lean on me and it came out sideways. I convinced myself the rough edges would smooth over with time, but they didn't. The truth revealed itself one Saturday evening when I decided to take my old photo albums down from the attic. Dusty leather books filled with my family's story, Marcus's first day of kindergarten, his awkward teenage smile, my mother's tired but proud face. I laid them on the coffee table, hoping maybe to spark some warmth. Tasha flipped through 1. barely glancing before setting it aside. "These are cute," she said, her voice dripping with that false sweetness. Marcus didn't even look. I sat there, my fingers pressed against the faded pictures, wondering how the things that once meant everything could mean nothing to them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked down the hall to get some water, and that's when I heard it, clearer than ever. Their voices low and sharp in the kitchen. "She's always in the way," Tasha said. "Like I can't even feel comfortable in my own house." My heart slammed in my chest. Her house? Marcus sighed. "I know, but what are we supposed to do? She's not going anywhere." "Maybe she should," Tasha snapped. "She's old, Marcus. At some point, we need our own life. She's just holding us back." My throat went dry. My knees wobbled. I pressed myself against the wall, trying not to breathe too loud. "She won't last forever," Marcus said finally. His words were heavy, deliberate. "Once she's gone, this place will be ours anyway." The silence that followed was worse than the words, because it told me Tasha didn't argue. She agreed. I stood there, cold as stone, listening to my own son, my only child, the one I sacrificed everything for, speaking about me like I was some obstacle in his way, just waiting to die. That night, I didn't cry. I just sat in my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could twist into something so ugly. But the next morning, when I went to take out the trash, I found something that proved it wasn't just ugly words in the dark. There, crumpled in the can, was a brochure, a glossy pamphlet with bold letters across the front, "Assisted Living Communities for Seniors." And in that moment, I knew. They weren't just whispering about me, they were planning. The morning I found that brochure in the trash, my hands trembled so bad I nearly dropped it. The paper was glossy, too bright for something so cruel. I smoothed it out on the counter, staring at the smiling faces of old folks posed in rocking chairs, hands folded neat in their laps, like being tucked away somewhere was the dream ending for people like me. I wasn't some fragile thing that needed tending. I was 62, still strong enough to mop a floor, haul a bag of groceries, and hold my own in this house I built with my sweat. But seeing that paper made me feel like I'd already been written off, like my life, my worth, had an expiration date I hadn't agreed to. I left the brochure right where I found it, on top of the trash, because I wanted to see if they'd notice. And sure enough, that evening, when Marcus came into the kitchen, his face tightened as soon as his eyes landed on it. He snatched it up quick, like a child caught with candy before dinner. "Ma, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered. "But lies have a taste, and I could taste his." "Then what is it, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady though my chest was pounding. "You shopping for someone else's mama?" He glanced toward the hallway where Tasha's heels clicked against the wood as she approached. "Just drop it, Ma," he muttered under his breath. But she didn't let it drop. She came in smiling like butter wouldn't melt. "It's not a big deal. We were just exploring options for the future." "The future?" I repeated, my eyes narrowing. "Seems to me the only future you worried about is getting me out your way." Her smile slipped. Just for a second, long enough for me to see the truth hiding behind it. After that night, the respect I'd thought still lingered between us started unraveling thread by thread. I noticed how Tasha stopped knocking before coming into my room, like my space didn't matter. She'd walk through, her perfume too sweet, her eyes scanning my things like she was already taking inventory. One Sunday morning, I was cooking breakfast, biscuits in the oven, bacon sizzling, when she wrinkled her nose and whispered to Marcus, "It smells like grease in here all the time. My clothes stink." I didn't even have to strain to hear. They didn't bother lowering their voices anymore. Marcus chuckled. "That's just Ma. You know how she is." I stood there, spatula in my hand, my back to them, and swallowed down the lump in my throat. My food, the meals that had raised him, that had kept him strong when he was a boy, were now something to mock. It wasn't just words either. It was the way Tasha moved things, claiming little territories in my own home. My rocking chair, the one spot where I found peace, got pushed into the corner one day, replaced by her shiny white armchair. "It looks more modern," she said, flipping her hair like it was a compliment. And Marcus, he said nothing. But what cut the deepest wasn't the furniture or even the food. It was the way they spoke about me when they thought I wasn't listening. One evening I paused at the top of the stairs, the house dim, their voices carrying from the living room. "She doesn't even act grateful," Tasha hissed. "For what?" Marcus asked, tired. "For us letting her stay here. She could be in some rundown apartment, but she's got this nice house, and we're the ones dealing with her moods every day." My hand gripped the banister so tight my knuckles cracked. Letting me stay here? The words echoed in my head, bitter as vinegar. This was my house. Mine. Paid for by the nights I scrubbed floors until my knees ached, by the mornings I left before dawn to fry eggs for strangers, by the decades I spent alone so my son could have something solid under his feet. And yet, here was my daughter-in-law speaking like I was a guest, a burden. The next day, I tried to test Marcus. We sat at the table, just the two of us, the morning light slanting through the blinds. "Marcus," I said gently, "do you ever think about all I did to get us here? This house? This life?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Yeah, Ma, I know. You've told me." "No," I pressed. "I mean, do you really know?" Finally, he sighed, setting the phone down. His eyes, my eyes, the same brown I'd seen staring back at me in the mirror all my life, looked cold. "You keep bringing it up like I owe you something," he said flatly. "I didn't ask to be born. You did what you had to do. That's not on me." The words hit me harder than any slap could have. For a moment, the room spun. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. That was when it clicked. This wasn't just Tasha whispering poison in his ear. This was already inside him. Maybe it had been growing for years and I was too blind, too hopeful to see it. I got up from the table, my chair scraping the floor, and went to my room before the tears could spill. But when I closed the door behind me, I whispered to myself, "Lord, give me strength." Because the way Marcus looked at me that morning told me the truth I hadn't wanted to face. My own son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an obstacle. And sooner or later, I knew that disrespect would boil over into something I couldn't ignore. It's a funny thing how a house can turn against you without ever moving an inch. The walls stay the same. The windows still let in the light. But the air shifts. It starts to feel heavier, colder. Like the very space that once held your laughter is now carrying your sorrow. That's how it felt in my home once Marcus and Tasha truly settled in. It wasn't one big moment that broke me. No, it was 1,000 small cuts. So tiny at first, I almost convinced myself they didn't exist. But over time, those cuts added up, and I could feel myself bleeding out in my own house. It started with the kitchen. That kitchen had always been my kingdom. I'd built my life around that stove, turning scraps into meals, teaching Marcus how to stir batter when he was small, rolling dough with my own mama's hands guiding mine in memory. But slowly, it was taken from me. One morning, I came in to find my cast iron skillet, seasoned over 30 years, sitting in the sink, soaking in soapy water. My heart dropped. Anybody who knows cast iron knows you don't drown it like that. You wipe it clean, rub it with oil, treat it like the treasure it is. I rushed to save it, but the damage was done. The black sheen, the years of care, gone under bubbles and neglect. When I told Tasha, she just shrugged. "It's just a pan. We can buy a new one." Just a pan. To her, it was metal. To me, it was memory. And Marcus, standing right there, didn't defend me, didn't even blink. Next, it was the living room. My old quilt, the one my mother sewed from scraps of fabric, her dresses, my baby clothes, was folded away, stuffed into a plastic bin. In its place lay some shiny gray throw from a home store, lifeless and thin. I asked Marcus, "Why'd you put my quilt away?" He didn't look up from the TV. Tasha thought it made the place look dated. Dated. That word stung worse than ugly. Dated meant disposable, meant something that had outlived its usefulness. I began noticing how my things disappeared one by one. The framed photograph of my graduation, gone from the hallway wall, my collection of porcelain angels, gifts from church friends over the years, boxed up in the attic. Even the cross that hung over the door vanished, replaced by some abstract painting of colors splashed like confusion. Each time I asked about it, Tasha would smile that same thin smile. "We're just trying to update the place, Mama, make it more modern." But it wasn't modern she was after. It was control. And Marcus, my Marcus, he let it happen. He started treating me like a guest in my own home. Decisions about bills, about repairs, even about who came over were suddenly made without me. I'd come home from church to find their friends sprawled across my couch, drinking, laughing too loud, not even bothering to greet me. And when I asked why I wasn't told, Marcus would wave me off. "Relax, Ma, it's just a get-together. You don't gotta know everything." But I did have to know, because this wasn't their house. It was mine. Mine. It wasn't just the things they moved or the gatherings they planned. It was the silence. That thick, punishing silence that settled whenever I walked into a room. I'd step into the living room and their conversation would cut off mid-sentence, their eyes darting at each other like I'd interrupted a secret. At dinner, I'd ask a question and get one-word answers, while they carried on conversations between themselves as though I weren't there. You don't know loneliness until you feel it under your own roof. But the silence broke one night. Oh, it broke. We were sitting at dinner, plates filled with the food I had cooked. Fried catfish, macaroni, collards. The air was already tense, thick with that same unease. Tasha pushed her greens around with her fork, muttering, "This is too greasy." Marcus chuckled. "You always cooking the same stuff, Ma. Don't you get tired of it?" I felt the sting, but I tried to keep calm. "This is the food you grew up on, the food that kept you strong." Tasha rolled her eyes. "Maybe that's why he's got high blood pressure now." The words hit me like a slap. I put my fork down and stared at them both, the laughter in their eyes, the disdain in their tone. And for the first time, I felt something crack inside me. I leaned back, my heart pounding, and I asked, "Do you even want me here?" The table went quiet. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, Marcus would speak up, that he'd remember the woman who worked her fingers raw to buy him shoes, to send him to school, to keep him from the hunger that haunted my childhood. But all he said was, "Ma, don't be so dramatic." And Tasha smirked. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a phase or tension or the stress of living together. This was deeper. This was rot. And if I didn't face it, it was going to consume me whole. I excused myself from the table, my food untouched, and walked to my room with my head held high. But inside, I was trembling, because I knew that silence I'd been clinging to was about to shatter, and when it did, nothing in this house would ever be the same again. It happened on a Thursday evening, one of those days when the air feels heavy before the storm. I was in the kitchen, setting the table, laying down plates with the same care I'd given my family all my life. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans. A meal that once would have brought Marcus running to the table, his eyes bright with hunger and gratitude. But now, it felt like I was setting a stage for actors who didn't want to play their parts anymore. They came in late, as usual. Tasha's heels clicking against the floor, her perfume too sweet, filling the space before she even spoke. Marcus behind her scrolling on his phone, barely looking up. Dinner started quiet, the clinking of forks and knives the only sound between us. Then Tasha let out a sigh, loud enough to be heard. "You know," she said, pushing her food around, "it's exhausting living like this, always cramped, no privacy, no independence." I set my fork down, slow. "Cramped?" I asked. "This house got 4 bedrooms and a yard big enough to host the whole church choir. Cramped ain't the word." "It is when it doesn't feel like ours," she shot back, her eyes cutting sharp. My chest tightened. "That's because it ain't. It's mine." Marcus shifted in his seat, and I could see the storm rising in him. His jaw clenched, his fingers drummed against the table. "Why you always gotta remind us?" he snapped. "We know, Ma. You've told us 100 times. You think I don't remember? Every time I walk through the door, it's the same thing. How you worked, how you paid for it, how it's yours. You think I don't know?" His voice rose, hot and sharp, the words like glass breaking inside me. "You should be grateful we let you live with us." The room went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. I stared at him, my own son, the boy I carried in my belly, the boy I stayed up nights nursing through fevers, the boy I shielded from the world with my bare hands. My lips parted, but no sound came out at first. The words rang in my ears, over and over, like an echo that wouldn't die. Grateful for them, for letting me live in the house I built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I felt my hands tremble, but I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I reached into my apron pocket, pulled out the ring of keys that had never left my side, and set them down on the table with a quiet clink. The sound was soft, but it sliced through the silence like thunder. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, my voice calm but steady, carrying every ounce of truth I had left. "Correction," I said. "You live with me." For a second, his face froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. Tasha's eyes widened, and that little smirk she always carried slipped right off her face. The air in the room shifted. I could feel it, like the tide turning. Marcus shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "That's what this is about, huh? Power. You just want to keep control over everything. You don't care how we feel." My voice cracked, but I held my ground. "Control? Marcus, all I ever did was give. I gave up my life so you could have yours. And now you stand here telling me I ought to be grateful? Boy, if you knew the nights I went without, the tears I swallowed just to keep this roof." "I didn't ask for that," he yelled, his fist slamming against the table. The dishes rattled, the gravy sloshed over. "I didn't ask you to sacrifice. That was your choice. Stop holding it over me like some debt I gotta pay." The words struck me harder than any blow. Tasha sat back, her arms crossed, watching it all unfold with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. I stood slowly, my chair creaking as it slid back. My hands were steady now, the trembling gone. I looked at my son, my own flesh and blood, and for the first time, I saw not the boy I raised, but a man who no longer recognized me. "You think I wanted to carry that weight?" I whispered. "You think I wanted to break my back, to go without, to walk this road alone? I did it because I loved you, because I thought you'd stand beside me, not against me." His eyes darted away, and for a split second, I thought I saw guilt flicker there, but it vanished just as quick, replaced by anger. "You just don't get it," he muttered. "You're in the way, always have been." The words lodged in my chest like thorns. I picked up my keys, slid them back into my pocket, and walked out of that kitchen without another word. My footsteps echoed down the hall, each one heavy as stone. When I shut my bedroom door behind me, my body gave way. I sank to the bed, my chest heaving, tears spilling hot down my cheeks. But even through the sobs, a fire lit inside me, because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't about clutter or cooking or quilts. This wasn't even about space. It was about erasure. about being pushed aside piece by piece until there was nothing left of me in the home I built. And if I didn't fight back, I would lose not just my house, but myself. The storm had broken, and I knew this was only the beginning. After that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint murmur of their voices in the living room, the occasional burst of laughter that didn't sound like laughter at all. It sounded like mockery. I pressed a pillow against my chest, holding myself the way no one else ever had, and my mind went backwards, back to the years when I was the only line of defense between my boy and the cold world outside. I remembered the winters when the heat was cut off and I'd pile blankets on top of Marcus, slipping into bed beside him just to keep him warm with the heat of my own body. He never knew that I went to bed shivering after sneaking out to work a graveyard shift, that I sometimes wore 2 coats in the kitchen just to save enough money for his field trip or his trumpet lessons. I remembered the smell of bleach on my hands from scrubbing office floors, the sting in my knees after hours of crouching, the humiliation of bosses who barely looked at me when they barked out orders. I took it all without complaint because I had a vision of Marcus standing tall, unburdened by the kind of shame that followed me my whole life. The house we lived in, it wasn't just 4 walls and a roof, it was my battlefield and my victory. I remembered the day I signed those papers, standing in that cramped little office with my hair pulled back, my good church dress clinging to my damp skin in the summer heat. My hands shook when I held the pen, but when the ink hit the paper, I felt like I'd climbed a mountain. "This house is yours now," the man had said, sliding the deed across to me. No, I thought. This house is Marcus's too, because everything I did, every coin I saved, every sleepless night I endured, I did for him. There were times when I wanted to give up, nights when the bills piled so high I thought the walls would cave in on me. I'd sit at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, whispering, "Lord, I can't carry this no more." But then I'd hear Marcus snoring in his room, his little chest rising and falling, and I'd get up, wash my face, and go back to work. I used to believe that love like that would plant seeds of gratitude, that when Marcus grew older, he'd look at me and see more than just a tired woman with lines on her face. He'd see the fighter, the protector, the reason he had a chance. But sitting there in the silence after his words, "You should be grateful we let you live with us," I realized maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe all my sacrifices had raised a man who thought they were just expected. My chest ached as the memories poured in. I thought of the Christmas when all I could afford was a toy truck from the discount store. I wrapped it in newspaper, praying Marcus wouldn't notice. When he opened it, his face lit up like I'd given him the world. He carried that truck everywhere, its paint chipped and wheels loose within a week. I kept the pieces long after he grew out of it, tucked in a shoebox in my closet because it reminded me of that moment, that smile, that innocence. And now that same boy, my boy, sat across from me at my table, speaking to me like I was some stray dog scratching at his door. I turned on my side, tears soaking, into the pillow. But even as I cried, I felt anger rising up beneath the grief, because I had given him everything. Not just food and shelter, but pieces of myself I'd never get back. I had given up friendships because I was always working. I had given up love because I told myself no man was worth risking Marcus's stability. I had given up my health, pushing through sickness, ignoring aches, swallowing pride. And for what? For him to sit in my house and treat me like a squatter in my own life? I sat up in bed, wiping my face with the back of my hand. I walked across the room and opened the closet, pulling out that old shoebox. Inside was the broken truck, a few old-school photos, the letters he wrote me in crooked handwriting. "I love you, Mama." I held them in my hands, my heart twisting, and I whispered, "Where did you go, baby? Where did that little boy go?" But the truth settled in my bones like cold. He hadn't disappeared. He had grown into the man he wanted to be, and maybe that man had no room for me. The thought broke me open, but it also sharpened me. Because if Marcus wanted to forget what I'd done, what I'd built, then I would remind him, not with tears, not with pleading, but with truth. I set the box back in the closet, closed the door, and stood in the dim light of my room. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me, eyes swollen from crying but burning with something stronger than sorrow. Resolve. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was betrayal. And I wasn't about to sit back and let my sacrifices be turned into ashes under their feet. I laid back down, my body heavy, but my mind awake. The house was quiet now, their laughter gone, replaced by the hum of the night. But I knew something deep in my bones. That night at the table was a turning point. The son I raised had shown me the truth of his heart. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. The days that followed were thick with tension. Every glance across the kitchen, every word exchanged in the hallway felt like walking barefoot over broken glass. I tried to keep my head high to move through my home with dignity, but inside I was unraveling. One evening, I went to pay the water bill, the same way I always had, sitting at the dining table with my checkbook, my glasses perched on the end of my nose. Only this time I couldn't find the envelope that had come in the mail. I looked through the stack of letters on the counter, then in the drawer where I usually kept them, but it was gone. Something in me stirred, a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. I started checking the other papers piled up near the microwave. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just another credit card offer, but when I pulled it free, my heart dropped straight into my stomach. It was a packet from the bank, forms for refinancing a mortgage, my address, my house. I froze, staring at the bold letters across the top. Refinance application. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. There it was, plain as day. Marcus's name, and right beside it, Tasha's. Their signatures scrawled across the lines where mine should have been. They had already signed the papers as if the house belonged to them, as if I was just a tenant passing through. I sat back in the chair, the packet slipping from my fingers onto the floor. My breath came shallow, the room spinning around me. My own son, my blood, plotting to strip me of the one thing I had fought for all my life. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart pound against my ribs, and whispered to the empty room, "Lord, why? Why would he do this to me?" The front door creaked open, voices flooding in. Marcus and Tasha, laughing about something on her phone. I scrambled, gathering the papers, sliding them under a stack of magazines before they could see. "Evening, Ma," Marcus said casually as he passed through, not noticing the way my face had drained of color, not seeing the fury boiling beneath my skin. Tasha caught my eyes for a moment, though, and I swear there was something smug there. Like she knew. Like she wanted me to find it. That night, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I stayed in my room, the papers hidden under my pillow, reading them over and over until the words blurred. They hadn't just thought about it, they were doing it, trying to take what wasn't theirs. And suddenly, all the little things made sense. The way Tasha had claimed my chair, replaced my quilt, sneered at my food. The way Marcus snapped whenever I reminded him the house was mine. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were softening the ground, preparing to uproot me altogether. I thought back to the whispers I'd overheard about the future, about me being in the way. They hadn't been vague complaints. They'd been steps in a plan to push me out of my own home one way or another. The weight of it all settled heavy in my chest. I could almost hear my mama's voice from long ago, warning me, "Don't let nobody rewrite your story, baby girl. You work too hard for what's yours." I lay awake all night, the papers spread across my bed like broken promises. My mind kept circling back to Marcus's face when he was small, the boy who used to crawl into my lap, whispering, "Don't cry, Mama, I'll take care of you when I'm big." Was this what taking care looked like? Signing me out of my own house like I was nothing more than a line on a piece of paper? By morning, something inside me had shifted. I still felt the ache, but beneath it burned a cold fire. They thought they were clever, that I was too old, too naive to understand what they were doing. But I wasn't about to let them steal my life's work from under me. At breakfast, I sat across from them, studying their faces as they chatted like everything was normal. Marcus avoided my eyes. Tasha smirked, like always, sipping her coffee. "Marcus," I said finally, my voice calm but edged with steel, "you been busy at the bank lately?" His fork clattered against the plate. He looked up quick, eyes wide, then narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't play dumb with me." Tasha reached over, touching his arm. "She doesn't know anything, just ignore it." But I did know, and the fact that she wasn't even trying to deny it told me everything I needed to know. I didn't push further, not yet. I let the silence hang, let it eat at them the way their betrayal was eating at me. Then I excused myself, walked back to my room, and shut the door. I pulled the papers out from under my pillow and laid them flat on the bedspread. My fingers traced over their signatures, each stroke of ink like a knife in my back. But knives cut both ways. As I sat there, staring down at the proof of their betrayal, I realized this wasn't just about keeping my house anymore. This was about reclaiming my power, about reminding them and myself who I was. And if they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. I carried those papers with me for days, folded tight in the bottom of my purse like a wound I couldn't let heal. Every time I touched them, the anger rose again, bubbling up from somewhere deep, a place I didn't even know existed inside me. I moved through the house, careful, quiet, studying Marcus and Tasha like I was seeing them for the first time. The way she strutted around my kitchen like a queen in her palace. The way he avoided my eyes whenever I lingered too long in a room. They knew I knew. And I knew they knew. The silence between us was no longer just heavy. It was suffocating. One evening, I finally decided I couldn't carry the weight anymore. I called Marcus into the living room. The lamp cast shadows across his face as he stood there, arms crossed like I was already accusing him of something. Maybe I was. "Sit down, son," I said. My voice was calm, too calm, even for me. He sighed, dropped into the armchair, my armchair, though now it was covered with one of Tasha's shiny throws. I pulled the papers from my purse, laid them on the coffee table between us. The sound of them hitting the wood was louder than thunder. "Explain this." His eyes darted to the papers, then back to me. For a moment, guilt flashed across his face, but it vanished quick, replaced by something harder, something colder. "It's not what you think, Ma," he said. "Then tell me what it is." He leaned back, arms still crossed. "We were just looking at options, trying to make things easier. You're not getting any younger, and this place, it needs work. We figured if we refinanced, we could—" "You could what?" I cut him off, my voice sharp. "Sign me out of my own house? Take the roof I built over your head and call it yours? Is that your idea of making things easier?" His jaw tightened. "Why do you always make everything about you?" The words hit me like a slap. I leaned forward, my hands pressing into the papers. "Because this is about me, Marcus. I worked for this house. I bled for it. I gave up everything so you'd never know the kind of hunger I knew, the kind of shame I carried. And this is how you repay me? By trying to steal the only thing I got left?" He stood suddenly, towering over me, his voice rising. "You think you're the only one who's sacrificed? You think living here, under your rules, listening to you remind us every day about what you did, that's easy for me? You're suffocating me, Ma, always have." My heart twisted. Suffocating you? I gave you breath, Marcus. I gave you life. Without me, there is no you. And now you standing here telling me I'm in the way? Tasha appeared in the doorway then, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, her smirk sharp as a blade. She didn't say a word at first, just watched us like she'd been waiting for this moment. Finally, she spoke. "He's right, you know. You hold on to this house like it's your throne. But what about us? We're the future, not you. Maybe it's time you stepped aside." The audacity in her tone, the venom in her words, it snapped something in me. I rose from my chair, my knees aching but my spine straight as a rod. "You don't get to tell me when my time is up," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You don't get to erase me from the home I built, not you and not him." Marcus stepped closer, his face twisted, his voice low and dangerous. "You can't stop us, Ma. One way or another, this house is going to be ours." For a long moment, the three of us stood locked in that room, the air thick enough to choke. I could feel the heat of my son's anger, the chill of his wife's hatred, and in the middle, my heart breaking into pieces. I wanted to scream, to curse, to throw them both out right then and there. But instead, I swallowed the storm and whispered, "You'll regret this." His eyes flickered, but he said nothing. He just turned and stormed down the hall, Tasha following with that satisfied smile still on her lips. I sank back into my chair, the papers still lying on the table like a wound split open. My body trembled, but my mind was sharper than ever. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't plead with God the way I had before. Instead, I sat at the table until the moonlight faded, whispering to myself over and over, if they want war, they'll get war. Because in that moment, I realized the son I raised wasn't coming back. The boy who once promised to take care of me was gone, buried under pride and poison. And if I was going to survive this betrayal, I couldn't just be a mother anymore. I had to be a fighter again. The morning after our confrontation, the house felt like a stranger. The walls, once my comfort, seemed to lean in around me, listening to my every breath. Marcus and Tasha moved about with an arrogance so thick I could taste it in the air. They thought they'd broken me. They thought my silence meant surrender. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't broken. I was sharpening. I knew I needed help, and I knew just where to find it. That Sunday, I dressed myself in my best church clothes, pressed my slacks, put on my wide-brimmed hat, and walked into Mount Olive Baptist with my head held high. My feet carried me down the aisle while the choir hummed low in the background, and though my heart was heavy, there was fire in my step. After service, I found Sister Elaine, who had always been more than just a church friend. She was a retired lawyer, sharp as a tack, even at 70. She hugged me, her eyes searching my face. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked, her voice low, full of that motherly concern. I pulled her aside, away from the others. My voice trembled at first, but once I started, the words poured out. The disrespect, the whispers, the papers. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, her whole demeanor changing from sympathy to steel. "They signed refinance papers without you?" she asked. I nodded. "With their names, not mine, like I don't exist." Elaine took my hands, squeezing them tight. "Listen to me, and listen good. They can't take your house, not without your signature, not without your consent. The deed is in your name, correct?" "It is," I said firmly. "I got those papers locked away in my safe." "Then that house is yours, child. Yours alone. Whatever game they're trying to play, it won't work unless you let it. And I don't think you the type to roll over." Her words settled deep in me, steadying my spirit. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground under my feet again. "I'm not going to let them take it," I whispered. "Good," Elaine said, her eyes flashing. "But don't just defend yourself. Be smart, quiet. Let them think they got the upper hand. Meanwhile, you get your papers in order, every deed, every bill of sale, every record, and when the time comes, you show them the truth." I nodded, my chest swelling with a new kind of strength, not the kind that comes from lifting heavy loads or staying up through the night. No, this was sharper, cleaner. The strength of a woman who knows she's been wronged and refuses to stay silent. That afternoon when I returned home, I didn't storm or shout. I smiled. I asked Marcus if he wanted more sweet tea. I told Tasha her hair looked nice. I played my part and they didn't even notice the difference. But behind closed doors, I worked. I pulled out the lockbox from under my bed, set it on the table, and sifted through decades of papers. The deed, stamped and signed, the receipts from every payment I'd made, the loan payoff notice that declared my mortgage settled years ago. Each piece of paper was a brick in the fortress I was building around myself. As I worked, I thought about Marcus as a boy, how he used to run around this yard barefoot, how he once painted me a picture in school with shaky letters that read, "My mama is my hero." That painting was still tucked in a frame in the attic. And now here I was, preparing to defend myself against the very child I'd been a hero to. The bitterness burned, but the clarity steadied me. That evening, at dinner, Marcus casually mentioned, "We've been thinking, Ma, maybe it's time we made some changes around here. Fix the place up, you know?" I kept my fork steady, my face calm. "Changes? Like what?" "Like updating the paperwork," Tasha said smoothly, sipping her wine, "making sure the house is secure for the future." My heart hammered, but I didn't let it show. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. That sounds smart. You young folks always thinking ahead." She smirked, thinking she had me fooled. Marcus nodded, relieved I wasn't fighting. But inside, I was screaming, because I knew what they meant. They wanted to ease me into it, step by step, until I signed something without even realizing. Not on my watch. Later that night, I stood in the quiet of my bedroom, looking out the window at the streetlights glowing against the dark. My reflection stared back at me, lined and weary but unbroken. "They think I'm weak," I whispered to myself. "They think I don't see. But I see everything, and when the time comes, they'll know who they're dealing with." I slipped the deed into my nightstand drawer, close enough that I could reach for it in my sleep. My hands stopped trembling that night. My tears dried, because the fear had turned into something else, something sharper, something stronger. Resolve. And if Marcus and Tasha wanted to keep playing games, they were about to learn I'd been playing the long game my whole life. The next few weeks I moved through my house like a shadow. I spoke less, listened more, and kept my secrets tucked close. Marcus and Tasha thought they had me where they wanted me. Tired, quiet, defeated. But they didn't realize every step they took was only fueling the fire inside me. I started with the locks. One Saturday morning, while they were out running errands, I went to the hardware store. The young man behind the counter gave me a curious look when I asked for new locks and keys, but I smiled and said, "Sometimes a woman just needs a little peace of mind." When I got home, I changed the locks on the basement and the attic, the two places that held everything that proved this house was mine. Old tax records, photo albums, the deed itself. If Marcus or Tasha thought they were going to dig through my history to erase me, they'd find themselves staring at a locked door. The first time Marcus tried to get into the attic and found it locked, he frowned. "What's this, Ma?" I kept my face calm, folding laundry like nothing was amiss. "Oh, just keeping things organized. Too many folks going through my things." He gave me a look, but said nothing. I could see the suspicion in his eyes, though, and it almost made me smile. Next, I reclaimed my kitchen. For weeks, Tasha had been moving things around, acting like my pots and pans were clutter, my spices outdated. So one afternoon, when she was out with her friends, I marched back into that kitchen and put everything right where it belonged. My cast iron skillet back on the stove, my sugar and flour jars back in the front cabinet, my mother's chipped mixing bowl back on the counter. When she came home and saw it, her face tightened. "I told you I reorganized for a reason," she snapped. I looked her square in the eye and said, "And I told you this is my kitchen. You don't like it, don't eat." Her mouth opened like she was about to spit fire, but Marcus came in just then, and she clamped it shut. She stormed off, muttering under her breath, and I let her. because for the first time in a long while, I felt like myself again. But the sweetest act of revenge was silence. Every time they whispered in the next room, I didn't strain to hear. I let them whisper. I let them think they were safe. And then, at just the right moment, I'd walk in with a smile, sit down, and look them both in the eyes. They'd stop cold, their words dying in their throats. That silence, theirs, not mine, was music to my ears. One night, as I was making myself tea, I heard them in the living room. "She's slipping," Tasha said. "She won't fight us, she's too tired." Marcus sighed. "Good, then it'll be easier when the time comes." I walked in then, the floor creaking beneath my slippers. They both froze, their faces stiff. I set my tea on the table, sat in my chair, and sipped slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Evening," I said, calm as a still pond. They didn't answer. And that silence, oh, that silence tasted sweeter than honey. I began to take small joys in reclaiming my presence. When Tasha lit her fancy candles in the living room, I opened the windows and let the night air blow them out. When Marcus tried to lower the thermostat, I raised it back up, reminding him whose name was on the utility bills. When their friends came over unannounced, I greeted them at the door, told them the house wasn't open tonight, and shut the door in their surprised faces. Marcus was furious. "Ma, you can't just embarrass me like that." "Embarrass you?" I said, my voice sharp. "Boy, you're embarrassing yourself, bringing strangers into a home that isn't yours to offer." His face turned red, his fists clenched, but he had no words, because deep down he knew I was right. Each act was small, but together they began to chip away at the control they thought they had. The house, once slipping through my fingers, was sliding back into my grip. But then came the letter. I found it in the mailbox one afternoon, sealed in an official-looking envelope from the bank. My stomach dropped as I opened it, my hands trembling just a little. Inside was a notice, cold and clear, final review pending, refinance application. My eyes scanned the lines, the words blurring. They had gone further than I thought. They weren't just talking anymore. They had submitted the paperwork, trying to move forward without me. I sat down on the porch, the letter trembling in my hands, and the fury rose again. But this time, it wasn't hot and wild. It was cold, focused. They thought they could erase me. They thought their signatures alone could undo decades of sacrifice, of blood, sweat, and tears. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my purse beside the deed, and whispered to myself, "Not today, not ever." Because I knew this fight was no longer about whispers or stolen seats at the table. This was war, and I was ready. The morning I went down to the courthouse, the sun was shining bright as if mocking the storm inside me. My hands were steady as I walked up those stone steps, clutching my purse like it held my entire life, because in a way, it did. The deed, the bills, the letters, the proof. Proof that this house was mine and no amount of betrayal could rewrite that. Sister Elaine had told me exactly what to do. "File for a notice to vacate," she'd said, her voice calm, sure. "It's your right. If they won't respect your home, then they don't deserve to live under your roof." I didn't know if I had the courage until that day, but when the clerk stamped those papers and slid them back across the counter to me, something inside me lifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. I came home with the envelope in my bag, the weight of it pressing against me like a stone. Marcus and Tasha were in the living room, sprawled across my couch, laughing at something on her phone. The sight made my stomach churn, but I didn't falter. I walked straight to the dining table, pulled the papers out, and laid them flat. "Marcus," I said, my voice clear as glass, "I need you to come here." He glanced up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What now, Ma?" "Now," I repeated, the steel in my voice leaving no room for argument. He sighed, dragging himself up. Tasha followed, arms crossed, her eyes narrowing like she already smelled the smoke before the fire. I pushed the papers toward him. "This is an eviction notice. You and Tasha have 30 days to leave my house." The room went still. Marcus blinked, his mouth opening like he didn't quite understand. Then his face twisted. "What the hell is this?" "It's what happens," I said, my voice trembling with emotion but firm, "when you try to steal from the very person who gave you everything. You think I don't know about the refinancing? You think I don't know you tried to sign this house out from under me? This is my home, Marcus. Mine. And now it's time you both found your own." Tasha snatched, the papers up, scanning them, her smirk faltering for the first time. "She can't do this," she hissed. "This house is practically ours already." I leaned forward, my eyes locking on hers. "Practically is not legally, and legally, this house is mine. You have 30 days, not one more." Marcus slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the walls. "You can't just kick me out. I'm your son." I felt the tears sting, but I refused to let them fall. "I know exactly who you are, and that's what makes this hurt so much. But being my son doesn't give you the right to betray me. Blood don't excuse betrayal." He stood there breathing hard, his fists clenched, his face red with fury. Tasha put a hand on his arm, whispering, "We'll fight this." I straightened, my hands steady on the table. "Fight all you want, but you'll lose, because the law is on my side and God is too. I didn't break my back all these years for you to throw me out like yesterday's trash. You want a house? Get your own." For a long moment, none of us moved. The air was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Then Marcus shoved the papers back toward me, his jaw tight. "You'll regret this, Ma." "No," I said quietly. "The only regret I have is raising a man who would do this to his own mother." His face hardened, and for the first time I saw a stranger staring back at me. That night, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Tasha stormed through rooms, slamming doors, muttering about lawyers. Marcus paced the floor, his anger radiating off him in waves. But me? I slept. For the first time in months, I slept through the night, because the fight was no longer just inside me. It was written in black and white, sealed and stamped. Over the next week, the tension only grew. Marcus barely spoke to me, except to curse under his breath when he passed me in the hallway. Tasha avoided me altogether, though I caught her on the phone more than once, whispering urgently, her eyes darting when I walked in. But I didn't flinch. I moved through my house with calm, reclaiming my steps. I cooked for myself, humming while I stirred the pot. I sat on my porch swing in the evenings, letting the air wash over me. And every time my hand brushed against the copy of the eviction notice in my pocket, I felt stronger. On the 10th day, an official letter arrived in the mail confirming what I already knew. The notice was valid. 30 days. No loopholes, no arguments. When Marcus read it, his face went pale. He crumpled the letter in his fist and threw it across the room. "You're really doing this," he muttered. "Yes," I said simply. He stared at me like he wanted to burn me alive with his eyes. And then he said the words that cut deeper than any knife. "You ain't my mother anymore." The room tilted, my breath catching in my throat. But I didn't let him see me break. I stood tall, my chin lifted, and replied, "If that's what you believe, then you already lost more than this house." He turned away, his shoulders rigid, his silence louder than any scream. I walked back to my room, my steps heavy but sure. Closing the door behind me, I finally let the tears fall. Not because I doubted my choice, but because I knew the truth. The papers I signed hadn't just evicted them from my home. They had evicted me from my son's heart. But if saving my home meant losing him, then so be it. Because I'd rather stand alone in the house I built than bow down to betrayal under my own roof. The 30 days crawled by, each one heavy with silence, glares, and the sharp slam of doors. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a battlefield, every corner holding its breath, waiting for the final strike. Marcus barely looked at me. When he did, his eyes weren't my son's anymore. They were hard, distant, filled with resentment I couldn't recognize. Tasha, on the other hand, grew bolder. She clacked through my halls in her heels, leaving a trail of perfume like smoke after fire. She sneered at my cooking, complained about the heat, left dirty dishes in the sink as if to remind me this wasn't mine alone anymore. But I let it all slide, because I knew time was on my side. The eviction date circled on my calendar like a promise. When the day finally arrived, the sky was gray and heavy with clouds, as if heaven itself knew what was about to happen. I rose early, brewed my coffee, and sat at the dining table waiting. I'd already spoken with the sheriff's office. Sister Elaine had walked me through every step. If Marcus and Tasha didn't leave, the law would make sure they did. At noon, the knock came. A firm, steady pounding that echoed through the house. I rose, my knees aching but my back straight, and opened the door. 2 deputies stood there, calm but resolute. One tipped his hat to me. "Ma'am, we're here to enforce the order. They got to go." I nodded, my throat tight. Behind me, Marcus appeared, his face twisted in rage. "You called the cops on your own son?" he barked. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "I didn't call the cops, Marcus. I called for justice, and justice don't care about titles, not even son." Tasha came storming in then, her hair wild, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. We live here. You can't just throw us out like dogs." One of the deputies held up a hand. "Ma'am, you've had 30 days. You were given notice. You need to gather your things and leave peacefully, or we'll escort you out." Her face turned red, and she whirled on Marcus. "Do something." He stood frozen, fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving with anger. "Ma," he growled, "you're making the biggest mistake of your life." I felt my heart twist, but I steadied myself. "No, Marcus, the biggest mistake of my life was believing blood would protect me from betrayal." The deputies moved into the living room as Marcus and Tasha began scrambling, tossing clothes into bags, slamming drawers. Every sound was like a hammer to my chest, but I held firm. I sat in my rocking chair, watching, the eviction notice folded neatly in my lap like a shield. At one point, Marcus stopped, a shirt clutched in his hands. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. For just a heartbeat, I saw my boy again. The boy who used to run barefoot in the yard, who once told me he'd buy me a big house when he grew up. But then it was gone. His eyes hardened again, his voice sharp as glass. "You'll die alone in this house," he spat. "That's what you wanted? Fine, don't come looking for me when it happens." The words sliced through me, but I refused to flinch. "Better alone than surrounded by thieves," I said quietly. Tasha laughed bitterly as she zipped her suitcase. "You'll regret this when no one's around to take care of you. Don't think your church friend's gonna fill that gap." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "I've been taking care of myself longer than you've been alive, and unlike you, I know what loyalty means." The deputies exchanged glances, but they stayed silent, letting the moment play out. Finally, the bags were packed. Marcus slung his over his shoulder, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with fury. He paused at the door, turned back one last time. "You're dead to me," he hissed. My breath caught, but I held his gaze, my voice trembling but unbroken. "If that's true, then you buried me yourself." He turned and stormed out, Tasha trailing behind him, her heels striking the floor like nails into wood. The deputies followed, their heavy boots echoing down the porch steps. Then the door closed, and the silence was deafening. For the first time in months, the house was empty. No whispers, no footsteps, no mocking laughter. Just me, the walls, and the creak of the porch swing outside. I sat back in my chair, the eviction notice still in my lap, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My chest ached with grief, but beneath it was something else. Something steadier. Peace. The battle was over. I had won. But the victory felt heavy, because in protecting my house, I had lost my son. I closed my eyes, rocking gently, whispering a prayer into the quiet. Lord, give me strength, because even in winning, I've lost more than I ever imagined. And though the tears came, hot and unrelenting, I didn't collapse under them, because I knew this was not the end of me. It was only the end of them in my life. The morning after they left, the house was still. Not silent in the suffocating way it had been while they were here. No, this was different. This was a silence that breathed, a silence that wrapped around me like an old quilt. For the first time in months, I could hear my own thoughts without the echo of mocking laughter or the scrape of slammed doors. I walked slowly through each room, my hand brushing the walls, reclaiming them as mine. My kitchen smelled like me again, coffee brewing, biscuits warming in the oven. My living room, stripped of their noise, seemed to sigh with relief. The quilt Tasha had hidden away, I pulled it back out and draped it proudly across the couch where it belonged. My mother's angels came down from the attic and back onto the mantel. The house, my house, was whole again, but the hole in my heart was another matter. I went into Marcus's old room, the one he'd slept in as a boy before it became a guest room. The faint outline of where his posters once hung still marked the walls. In the closet, a shoebox sat on the shelf, untouched. I pulled it down and opened it. The broken toy truck, the crooked letters he'd once written me, "I love you, Mama," scrawled in his uneven hand. My throat closed as I held those scraps of the boy he used to be. How does a son turn into a stranger? How does love, poured out so endlessly, curdle into resentment? I sat on the edge of that bed and let myself weep. For him, for me, for all the years I had given up in the name of a love that now stood shattered at my feet. But even as the tears fell, I knew one truth. I had done what I had to do. If protecting my home meant losing my son, then maybe I had lost him long before the eviction papers were signed. Maybe the boy who once promised to take care of me when he grew up had been gone for years, buried under bitterness and pride. In the weeks that followed, people from church came by to check on me. Sister Elaine brought casseroles. Brother James mowed the lawn. They sat with me on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea, listening as I told the story. Every detail, every wound. Their eyes filled with sorrow, but also with pride. "You stood your ground," Elaine told me, patting my hand. "That's not easy, not when it's your own flesh and blood, but sometimes the hardest love is the love that says no." I thought about that often. Hard love. I had always thought love meant giving, pouring, emptying myself until there was nothing left. But maybe love also meant boundaries. Maybe it meant saying, "This far and no further." The poetic justice came one quiet afternoon, weeks later. I was on the porch swing when a letter arrived, addressed to me. I opened it carefully, my heart thudding. Inside was a bank statement, confirmation that the refinance had been denied, stamped across the top in bold red letters, "Application rejected." I laughed then, a deep belly laugh that surprised even me. They had tried to erase me with their signatures, but the law, the truth, had stood firm. My name was the only one that mattered on that deed. My name, my blood, my sweat, my sacrifice. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it into my Bible, right between Psalms and Proverbs. Because it wasn't just paperwork, it was testimony. Proof that what God had given me, no man could take away. Still, late at night when the house was dark and the wind rattled the windows, I thought of Marcus. I wondered if he hated me now, if he cursed my name to anyone who would listen. I wondered if he lay awake too, haunted by the memory of the mother who once gave him everything. But then I remembered his words. "You ain't my mother anymore." And I knew some wounds would never heal. One Sunday, standing at the church podium during testimony, I told my story. I told the congregation about betrayal, about disrespect, about fighting for what was mine. I saw heads nodding, tears shining in eyes, hands raised in agreement, and I asked them, as I ask you now, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven? Would you have folded? Or would you have stood, even if it meant standing alone? Because that's the choice I had to make. Now, every morning, I wake in my own bed in my own house. I brew my coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the sun rise over the yard where Marcus once played. And though the ache in my chest is still there, it is quieter now, softened by peace. I don't know if my son will ever come back. I don't know if one day he'll knock on this door, eyes wet with regret, asking forgiveness. If he does, I'll listen. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean handing over what is mine to be trampled again. This house is more than wood and brick. It is my story, my sacrifice, my sanctuary, and I will not surrender it, not to betrayal, not to greed, not even to the boy I once called my whole world. So I sit here now, my quilt wrapped around me, my angels watching from the mantel, my Bible open on my lap, and I whisper to myself, strong and steady, I am not erased. I am not defeated. I am still here. And I'll leave you with this question, the one I wrestle with every night. If you were me, would you forgive the ones who tried to take everything? Or would you close the door, the way I did, and keep walking forward alone,